Metro keeps calling cops on me, I shouted as another police cruiser pulled into my driveway. 2 visits in one day. This was getting ridiculous. The officer approached cautiously. Sir, we've received multiple complaints from Whispering Pines. HOA about... I cut him off, waving my property deed in his face. Officer, I'm no HOA member. I own this land free and clear. The veins in my neck bulged as 5 months of harassment boiled over. 5 acres completely outside their jurisdiction. Look at the survey lines yourself. I understand, sir, he said, examining my paperwork. But they're insistent. Because Barbara wants control, I interrupted. This isn't the first time and it won't be the last. The officer looked uncomfortable. Look, I understand your frustration, but they're claiming your new construction violates their bylaws. Because their power-hungry president Barbara wants my land, I said, pulling out my phone to record. This harassment has got to stop. You can clearly see I'm not in their jurisdiction. I pointed to my half-finished barn. They've called you guys 3 times this week. 3 times. For building on my own property. The officer reviewed my paperwork, eyes widening. Sir, it appears you're right. You're not in their HOA at all. The officer examined my paperwork, nodding. Looks like you're right. Sorry to bother. You. As he turned to leave, I asked, who filed the complaint? Whispering Pines HOA board. Specifically a Ms. Barbara Winters. I should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. 3 days later, another police car. This time the complaint was about excessive noise disturbance from my property. I was literally just mowing my lawn at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Officer Rodriguez, same guy as before, looked even more apologetic. Look, I'm sorry about this. I'll talk to them about making frivolous calls. I appreciate that, but something tells me they won't listen, I said. I decided to finish my barn project quickly. I worked from sunrise to sunset for a week straight, completing what should have been a month-long project. The day after I finished, Barbara and 2 other HOA board members appeared at my property line. That structure doesn't meet our aesthetic guidelines, she announced, pointing at my barn. The HOA board has voted. It needs to be painted autumn beige to match the neighborhood scheme. I took a deep breath. Barbara, for the last time, I'm not in your HOA. You have 0 authority over my property. The man beside her, a skinny guy, with wire-rimmed glasses, stepped forward. Actually, we've reviewed the original development plans. Your parcel was subdivided from Whispering Pines land, which means covenant restrictions still apply. That's complete nonsense and you know it, I said, temper rising. My land was never part of your development. It was farmland before I bought it. The 3rd board member, a woman with a permanent scowl, chimed in. We can make things very difficult if you continue being uncooperative. That sounded like a threat. I pointed to my property line. You're trespassing. Please leave. They retreated, but Barbara called over her shoulder. This isn't over. She wasn't kidding. The next week brought complaints about my unapproved vegetable garden, my truck parked in my own driveway, and even my dogs barking, though my nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Each time, local police would show up, increasingly frustrated at being used as the HOA's enforcement arm. Officer Rodriguez even warned me off record, they're trying to wear you down. They've done this before to force properties into their jurisdiction. More houses mean more HOA fees. Then came the certified letter. It claimed my property was in violation of 17 HOA bylaws, each carrying $100 daily fine. According to their calculations, I already owed $8,500 with penalties accruing daily. I called a lawyer that afternoon. They can't do this, my attorney Melissa confirmed after reviewing everything. You're clearly outside their jurisdiction, but these tactics aren't uncommon. HOAs can be aggressive about expanding their territory. So what do we do? I asked. First, we send a cease and desist. If they persist, we file for harassment. 2 days after the cease and desist was delivered, I woke to find an official-looking notice taped to my front door. Final warning. Non-compliant structures will be removed by HOA contracted services on Friday, May 15th. They were threatening to demolish my barn. I called Melissa immediately, then installed security cameras covering every inch of my property. I also took the day off work to stay home and guard my place. Sure enough, around 10 a.m., a pickup truck with Valley Demolition painted on the side pulled up, followed by Barbara's silver Mercedes. I met them at the edge of my property, phone, recording video in one hand. You take one step onto my land and I'll have you arrested for trespassing and attempted destruction of property. I called out. Barbara emerged from her car. We have authorization to remove non-compliant structures. I held up my phone. I'm on the line with the sheriff's department right now. Would you like to explain to them why you're falsely claiming authority over my property? The demolition crew looked uncertainly between us. We're just doing a job we were paid for, the foreman said. The job is illegal, I replied, and I have the paperwork to prove it. They ultimately left, but Barbara's parting words chilled me. The HOA always wins these fights. Always. You don't have the resources to battle us. That night, I couldn't sleep. What if she was right? I was just one person against an organized group with deep pockets. The next morning, I found my mailbox. Smashed in. No proof who did it, of course. Then my water stopped working. I discovered someone had tampered with my well pump. When I checked my security footage, it showed a figure in dark clothing disabling it at 2 a.m. The face wasn't visible, but the build matched Barbara's husband, whom I'd seen at a neighborhood gathering before I became persona non grata. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was vandalism and intimidation. Officer Rodriguez suggested filing a restraining order, but I knew that wouldn't stop them. I needed to understand what I was really up against. I spent a weekend researching Whispering Pines, HOA, digging through public records and online forums. What I discovered was shocking. 3 previous homeowners had fought similar battles with this HOA, and all had eventually sold their properties at below-market rates to approved buyers who turned out to be relatives of board members. The HOA wasn't just annoying, it was running a real estate scam. I gathered records, screenshots, and testimonials from former residents who'd been pushed out. I tracked property transfers and connected the dots between board members and mysterious buyers. The pattern was undeniable once you saw it. Barbara's tactic wasn't just to annoy me into compliance. She wanted me gone so they could expand their territory and line their pockets. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday. I returned from work to find county vehicles parked outside my house. A building inspector was placing a stop work order on my barn. "What's going on?" I demanded, running through the rain. The inspector looked apologetic. "We received multiple reports that this structure was built without proper permits and inspections. That's impossible. I have all my permits. Right here." I pulled out my folder of documentation. Approved 3 months ago. He examined them closely. "These look legitimate, but we have documentation showing this property is under HOA jurisdiction, which requires additional approvals." "Let me guess. The HOA provided that documentation?" He nodded. "Mrs. Winters submitted it personally." I showed him my property survey again, pointing out the clear boundaries. "They're falsifying documents now." The inspector frowned. "This is above my pay grade. The stop work order stays in place until this jurisdiction issue is resolved. But the building is already complete. I can't use my own barn now." "I'm sorry, sir. Take it up with the county office." As he drove away, I stood in the rain, fury building inside me. Not only were they harassing me and vandalizing my property, but they were now actively falsifying legal documents to force my compliance. I called Melissa again, my voice shaking. They've escalated. They're submitting fake documents to the county. This changes things, she said, the gravity evident in her voice. Falsifying official documents is criminal fraud. We need to move quickly. The next day, I took emergency leave from work and met with Melissa and a private investigator she recommended. We spread everything on her conference table: property records, HOA harassment documentation, security footage, and the falsified documents. We have enough for a civil case, Melissa said, but criminal charges would require more concrete proof of intent. The PI studied the falsified boundary document. The problem is proving who actually created this. Barbara submitted it, but she could claim she received it from someone else in good faith. I felt deflated. So they can just keep doing this? Not necessarily, the PI said slowly. What if we could get them to admit their overall strategy? The pattern of harassment, the property flipping scheme, all of it? How would we do that? I asked. Melissa and the PI exchanged looks. It's risky, she warned, but there might be a way to get them to incriminate themselves. We hatched a plan that might end this nightmare, or could make everything much worse. If it failed, I could lose everything. If it worked, the HOA would be finished. I had 3 days to prepare and I barely slept. This was my last stand. The trap was set. I'd listed my property for sale by owner at a suspiciously low price. As predicted, Barbara called within hours. I've heard you're finally being sensible and selling, she said, fake sweetness dripping from every word. Just tired of fighting, I replied, trying to sound defeated. Too many legal fees and headaches. Well, I might know a buyer interested in a quick cash sale, no inspections needed. That would be helpful, I said carefully. Why don't you come by to discuss it? Around 7 tonight. I'll bring the paperwork, she said eagerly. At 6:30, Officer Rodriguez and a detective from the County Fraud Division arrived, hidden in my home office. Melissa was there too, with recording equipment legally set up. The PI was parked down the road, watching for Barbara's arrival. At 7:05, Barbara's Mercedes pulled in. She wasn't alone. She'd brought the HOA treasurer, Martin, with her. Perfect. I welcomed them with a convincing display of resignation. Thanks for coming. I just want this over with. Smart decision, Barbara said, setting her briefcase on my kitchen table. We have a buyer ready to pay $175,000 cash. My property was worth at least $300,000. That seems low, I said cautiously. Martin shrugged. It's the best you'll get considering the legal issues and permit problems. Those could take years to resolve. Permit problems your HOA created, I noted. Barbara smiled thinly. Let's not dwell on unpleasantries. The point is, we have a solution. Who's the buyer? I asked. A private investor, she replied vaguely. They understand the unique situation here. You mean they know you've been falsifying documents and harassing me until I had no choice but to sell? Barbara's smile faltered. I wouldn't phrase it like that. How would you phrase it? I pushed. Martin jumped in. Look, this is simply market forces at work. Your property would be more valuable within the HOA's jurisdiction anyway. So you admit this is about expanding the HOA's territory? It's about community consistency, Barbara insisted. We've done this successfully with other non-compliant properties. Everyone eventually sees reason. Like the Thomas property last year, and the Wilsons before that, I asked, naming previous victims. All sold below market to private investors who turned out to be your relatives. Their faces changed. Barbara's mouth tightened to a thin line. Martin shifted uncomfortably. You've been investigating us, she accused. You're not the only one who can do research, I replied. I know about all of it. The boundary manipulation, the harassment campaigns, the property flips to family members. It's all documented. Barbara's demeanor changed instantly. You're recording this, aren't you? I smiled. Why would you think that? Guilty conscience? She stood abruptly. This meeting is over. We'll see you in court. Before you go, I said calmly, you should know the County Fraud Division has been very interested in those falsified boundary documents you submitted. Forgery of official documents is a felony in this state. The color drained from her face. We're leaving, Martin stammered, pulling Barbara toward the door. As they reached for the handle, it opened from the outside. Detective Warren stood there. With Officer Rodriguez, Barbara Winters and Martin Fletcher, we'd like to ask you some questions about potentially falsified county documents. The look on their faces was worth every sleepless night, every moment of stress, every penny spent fighting them. Barbara tried to compose herself. This is entrapment. He tricked us into coming here. Actually, Detective Warren said, we have a warrant to search the HOA offices based on evidence already collected. Finding you here is just convenient. Martin crumbled first. Barbara, we should cooperate. I told you the document alterations were going too far. Barbara's eyes widened. Shut up, Martin, but it was too late. The detective's eyebrows raised. Document alterations. We'd be very interested in hearing more about that. As they were escorted to separate police cars, I stood on my porch, feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. This wasn't just about my property anymore. It was about stopping years of corruption that had hurt so many families. The investigation uncovered everything: years of document falsification, property fraud, and illicit profits. 6 HOA board members ultimately faced charges. The county dissolved the Whispering Pines HOA completely after discovering their financial mismanagement. Most homeowners were actually relieved to be free of the excessive fees and restrictions. At the court hearing, I watched Barbara and Martin accept a plea deal. Before sentencing, the judge addressed them directly. Your actions weren't just about aesthetics or property values. You systematically bullied people out of their homes for profit. That stops today. 3 months later, Officer Rodriguez stopped by my property, not for a complaint, but to share news. 2 of the families who were forced to sell are filing to reclaim their properties, he said. Your case created the precedent. As for my property, I kept it, built a second barn just because I could, and painted it bright red instead of autumn beige. The former HOA members who weren't charged created a voluntary neighborhood association instead. One focused on community events and actual support, not control. Sometimes fighting back isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about stopping bullies from claiming new victims. The moral of the story: know your property rights, document everything, and never underestimate the power of one determined homeowner against a corrupt HOA.